The Scribedriver, a pen designed and released by Linus Media Groups, which, if you weren't in the know, is the company behind the YouTube tech channel Linus Tech Tips, and many others, which is led in part at least by Linus Sebastian, the man with the tips, tech tips that is. So it may seem unusual that they're releasing a pen, and the story behind that is equally as strange. So what we have here is a bolt action pen, which means this is not a fountain pen like I'd normally be looking at, but rather a fancy ballpoint pen. What makes this a bolt action is the mechanism to extend the tip of the ink cartridge out of the pen, and because of the spring-loaded nature of the pen, it is quite satisfying to switch back and forth. On the bolt here, you can see the LTT logo. This is the only bit of branding on the whole pen, and for my specific model, you can see the brass on the bolt, which is just a little bit of an accent color. They also have this in a all stainless version. I just liked the little bit of color pop on that. Right next to that, you can see a folded metal clip, which is bolted onto the side of the pen. The texture of the barrel is very smooth. Unscrewing the two pieces of the barrel, it's quite smooth for the threads. And this will show that there is a very small O-ring on here. And what that does is help prevent your pen from coming loose when it's tightened down. Just provides a little bit of extra friction. And this will show the included ink cartridge, which in this case is a Shmidt Easyflow 9000M. And in the bottom half of the pen there will be the spring, which is just loose, so you definitely want to make sure you hold on to that, as the pen will not function as intended without that. The grip on the pen is a diamond crosshatch, similar to what you'd see on various tools, and that follows in nicely to how this pen came into being. Linus Media Groups has spent a decent amount of time designing and manufacturing their own screwdriver, and part of that was the company that originally were making the shafts fell through, and they ended up with multiple tons of shafts that could not be used in the final product. Rather than wasting these, they designed a pen which would use the shafts, and they would machine from the faulty shafts of the screwdriver and turn that into a pen. While the grip is reminiscent of their screwdriver, supposedly it is a much toned down version, so the diamond pattern is not quite as sharp. It's intended to be held for extended periods of time, so when it comes to a ballpoint pen, they've designed the body of the pen and the mechanism to extend and retract the ink cartridge. So what will come down to what makes this a good pen or not really comes down to the overall ergonomics and feel of the pen, and then of course the cartridge they include. So with a quick writing sample, I actually found this pen with the included ink cartridge to write quite smooth. I'm personally familiar with the Pilot G2s, which use a similar style of cartridge but are actually not compatible with this pen. The Pilot G2s use a longer and slightly wider style of cartridge, where the Scribedriver from LTT is going to use the more European standard, which are commonly compatible with the Parker pens. And at least compared to the Pilot G2 I have here, it actually writes smoother than that one, but this one's been rolling around in my junk drawer for who knows how long, so it's possible that it's a bit past its prime. So now that we've wrote with both of these, if you're from my community, you may be wondering, you've got a perfectly good writing fountain pen, why would you even need a ballpoint or roller ball pen? And really what it comes down to is a lot of fountain pen ink is not waterproof or permanent. On top of that, it can take some time to dry, so especially in situations where you're signing documents where you need the ink to be relatively permanent, or like when you're signing a credit card receipt and the paper's definitely not designed for fountain pen ink, so it would just become a smeary mess. Having a really nice ballpoint pen can give you a much closer experience to what you're used to with a nice fountain pen without going all the way back to a super cheap ballpoint pen. Linus can be quoted as saying they're offering this pen for a very competitive price, and depending on how you look at that, that can definitely be seen as true. The pen, compared to a more custom or boutique brand, like the offerings from Tactile Turn or Cars Customs, it would be a fraction of the price of what they offer for a similar styled pen. But if you're not particularly worried about what brand or how it's made, you can pick up pens on Amazon for a fairly similar or even lesser price depending on what you're looking at. I found a few that have similar minimalistic stylings to the Scribedriver, which use the same style of cartridges, just to give you an idea of what's out there. I haven't personally tried any of these, so I can't speak to the actual quality of the pen, but what makes the pen write smoothly is going to be more so the cartridge rather than the pen. The pen itself is going to add to the overall feel and ergonomics. I find this pen to be a bit narrow, for my taste at least, compared to like the Pilot G2 or a number of different fountain pens, which tend to be a couple millimeters wider. I just find that a bit more comfortable. But so far I have not found this one to be uncomfortable to write with, mainly because of the grip. I don't feel like if I don't hold on to it extra tight, I'll lose hold of it. And since it has a nice ink cartridge in it, it does not require a lot of downward force to keep the pen writing. Whereas if you were using something like a cheap ballpoint pen, those typically require more downward force, and in turn I end up kind of death gripping them, which causes my hand to cramp up. So beyond just the personal preference of how wide the grip of the pen is, I do find this quite comfortable. The length of the pen is plenty long enough that I have no issues using it in my hand, and the weight and balance of the pen are quite nice. It's got a bit of heft to it, but it's not heavy by any means, and it's not significantly weighted one way or the other to make it uncomfortable to hold. I do like the very minimalistic styling and the very minor branding. That way you know where it's from, but it doesn't scream that this is an influencer product. The clip is plenty usable. While very basic, it'll get the job done. And the knurling on the pen makes it easy to hold on to, although it does seem to gather a bit of gunk from your hand. And while I don't think it'd be an issue to clean this out, it's just one of those things you might want to keep in mind. On these, I believe the demand exceeded their expectations as they sold out of their initial batch that they had pre-made before launching. So if you are interested in this, you will need to sign up on a notification list, but they do plan to make and release more, so that'll give you a chance to be notified when they're ready for purchase. And if you just can't wait for such a pen, I did include some links in the description to the similar styled pens I found on Amazon, just to give you some other options as well.